Peter Schindler, thank you for joining us today. Why did you decide to take a 100-day trip along the Yangtze and the Yellow Rivers?
I think that the question really needs to be, why did I decide to take a 100-day trip along the Yangtze in a car from the 1950s? In fact, the reason for that is that I wanted to write another book. When I was lacking ideas for what this book should be about, I wanted it to have to do with China and with driving, which is my passion. But I didn't know what. And then what happened is, about 3.5 years ago, I borrowed this car, or a car like it, in Hong Kong, and had never driven one before, but in fact got lost in Hong Kong driving it, and suddenly noticed that this car made me the subject of a lot of attention, and people were intensely curious as to what this thing is, because it looks like no other car in the world, really. And which is at that time, 3.5 years ago, when I got lost in Mongkok, as a part of Hong Kong, I suddenly had this idea, what if I drove this car through China? And wouldn't that give me all the stories I needed for another book? And that was really the starting point of this whole journey, both I guess metaphorically, the project, and then the actual journey, actually driving it.
So I know it's a long and complex journey, but take us through just sort of a thumbnail sketch of what the journey entailed, and we'll talk a little bit more also about some of the preparations.
Well, I started, initially I actually just, once I had the car in China and registered, I just wanted to head out on the first day and drive until I would meet somebody nice or see something wonderful, and then stop and hang out for a little while and keep going. But because this project was, in fact, this madness was sponsored by Nokia, to whom I'm very grateful, they said, well, you can't do that, because if you have no plan, where are we going to put the press conferences, and I said, so then we decided together that since this journey was really a discovery about discovering China, and that we would make the two large rivers of China, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, sort of the anchor of the itinerary and of the journey. So I started, having said that, I started in Shanghai, where the Yangtze flows into the East China Sea. And I made this, and it started essentially in China's hippest city, Shanghai. Then drove along the Yangtze, pretty much, all the way to its source in the Tibetan highlands, where all I would meet is really yak, so from the hippest to the most remote. And then from there to the source of the Yellow River, because my friend who suggested it, he said, this is great, you drive to the source of the Yangtze. And he didn't suggest that I actually came back, or would come back. So, so I said, well, I got to come back somehow. So I drove to the source of the Yellow River, and then along the Yellow River, back to where it flows into the East China Sea in the Shandong province. And that added up to about 21,000 kilometers in a good 100+ days.
Okay, well, let's take a step back. First of all, the thing that's most important to this whole trip is the car. So tell us a bit about this yellow convertible sports car that you did this trip in.
This car is called a Caterham, and I call it the granddaughter of a Lotus 7. The Lotus 7 was created by Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, very well-known Formula One racing team since the 50s, really, all the way through the 80s. Colin Chapman produced this car, created this car in the 50s for racing purposes. And then in the 60s, Lotus sold the design rights to it to this company called Caterham. And Caterham have continued to produce it for the last 40, 50 years, making small modifications to it, but the essential design has been preserved. And even today, it's one of the most exciting cars actually to drive. Caterham nowadays make about 300-400 a year, and it's an enthusiast market. People either go club racing with it, in the UK in particular, but also in the States, in Japan, in fact, in Germany. And a few people do take it on the road. It is fully, it can be licensed. You can get a license plate for it. But certainly there isn't a single one in China. Well, until I started this project.
Now, having seen this low-slung roadster, how did it negotiate 21,000 kilometers of roads and what I would imagine were some fairly rural places? You talk about Tibet and others. I mean, obviously the roads were passable.
Yes, yes. Well, to some extent.
What were the challenges there?
Something happened or proved more difficult that I hadn't anticipated, and conversely, the things that I had anticipated, of course, didn't happen, as always is the case, or as often is the case.
Like what?
The first two, what I didn't think about, and then proved incredibly difficult, was the car is, as I said, very low slung, as you called it, but more importantly, it has an incredibly, very little road clearance, ground clearance. It's basically a matchbox, high, not much more than that. And so the car actually, the whole journey ended up being more like, surfing on rocks. We had to mount a steel plate under it, a very strong one, yes, because on the eastern parts of China, I had actually very little difficulty because the roads are very good. But the further west you got into the road areas, literally, there were days when I practically surfed from morning till night. And so I began to worry day by day, whether I would actually make it. Not because of things breaking down, but just the road becoming impassable. The car just can't get through. But that, in the end, we made it. But I was on edge most days.
Did you need help from people along the way?
Oh my, yeah. No, I was basically pulled out of ditches and pushed through rivers more than once. So that was what I actually didn't really anticipate. I don't know for what reason, but maybe because I had driven quite a bit in China and had never seen roads quite as bad as I ended up encountering during this journey. The thing that I did anticipate was lots of things breaking. Engine braking, gearbox braking, suspension braking, all of that, and we had lots of spare parts, and nothing broke, pretty much, except for one small little sensor. Once again, a part that we didn't bring along, so we had to find it. So remarkably, here's a car from the 50s, effectively designed for the racetrack, and yet, and I pushed it through China. Over the worst terrain you can imagine, and the temperature differences, huge temperature differences, and what have you. And the darn thing just kept running. So that was unexpected, but it allowed me to concentrate on getting to know the country, and as I say, getting out of difficult road situations.
So what was the reaction? This foreigner in a yellow car, out in places where maybe they hadn't seen foreigners before.
The problem wasn't so much with not having seen, a foreigner before. It was just simply this car, because in China, at the moment, and already for the last 5 years, and 10 years even, and probably for many more years to come, people want cars. It's a possession, that they just want, and I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, what they see typically is SUVs, four-wheel drive cars, which are suitable for those parts of the world, and that's what they know. But something that essentially looks like not a Formula One car, but pretty much an open-top, open-wheel car, let alone one that has an open top, they had never seen. And so wherever we went, we were instantly surrounded by people, to the point where you couldn't see anything except for a beehive of people. And somewhere in there buried was myself and the car. Miss Daisy, we ended up calling her. So wherever we stopped, people would ask 3 questions. Invariably, first question would be, how much? Because they wanted to know how much the thing sells for. The second question was, how fast? They wanted to know how fast is this thing going? And then after a little bit more thought, but again, invariably, they would say, what do you do when it rains? And then I just told them I'll drive faster. So it does actually have a soft top, but usually, it's tucked away in the back, and actually you roll this thing up. It's not like, you press a button and it closes. Right. So, so how much? How fast? And what do you do when it rains? So,
Do any incidents stick out, maybe when someone was helping you out of a ditch or whatever, any particular moments when you had interaction with people that was unique or interesting?
I'll give you lots of cases, but one is it just comes to mind right now. As I said, this is a car that people really had never seen. For all intents and purposes, it could have been and probably was a UFO, you know, arriving from outer space, flying low through the Tibetan highlands. And one day, I had, for the first time, after about 5-6 weeks of driving, I encountered a hitchhiker. And I heard her, as it was a lady, a large lady with a tremendous basket of, you know, produce, farm produce on her back, yelled something to the effect of, you know, give me a lift. And I didn't stop. I kept going. And after about 5 minutes, I said, what an idiot you are, you know. This would have made such a fantastic story. Imagine, you know, trying to fit her in the car. Probably would have ended up the other way around. My car would have been stuffed into her basket, you know, because it's a tiny car. And so I said to myself, next time I'm going to encounter a hitchhiker, I'll definitely stop. So sure enough, the next day, and I thought this was not going to happen for a long time because it hadn't happened in 6 weeks. So the next day, however, I drive out of a village, and sure enough, there is somebody again, in this case a young lady, saying the same thing, you know, give me a lift. And I keep going again, but after 100 yards, I basically slammed on the brakes, and I started backing up. And actually, I was quite sure that she might run away. I mean, you know, what would you do when a UFO lands, right? You run away. You don't say hi. So she, but she stood there, and I backed up, you know. And she was really beautiful too, you know, and I said, oh my God, you know, I'm going to get a hitchhiker to ride with me. And I was really worried she might, in the last minute, run away. But no, she stopped, so I jumped out, you know, gallantly, right, prepared the side seat for her to sit in. And so it was a young lady, a student, in fact, she told me. I asked her twice whether she was sure that she would actually be comfortable riding with me. Because, you know, here I'm in a really remote area. As I said, a foreigner with this UFO. You know, that, anyway, but she was fine. So she got in, and after about driving 10 minutes, we get around the turn, and there's the police. And to be honest, I just broke out in cold sweat, because I figured, what's the police going to do to me, you know? Because I have this really young, good-looking lady next to me. They must think, you know, what are his intentions? Well, make this story, try to cut it short. The guy investigated me, everything that, I mean, he asked every possible question. He wanted to see every possible paper I had on me. And finally, he whipped out of basically something out of his pocket, which was a little Kodak instant camera. And he said to me, he says, is it all right if I sit in the car? And basically, in the end, all he wanted to do was his picture taken with her. And then we kept going. So just one instant, you know, instance of funny things happening along the way, and it just happened over and over again. And I had a great conversation. This young lady she studied Tibetan language and culture in a nearby village, and she sort of goes home every 3-4 weeks, and then hitches a ride back to the school.
On your website, ontheroadinchina.com, you talk about confronting different border guards, not only with the strange side of your car, but myriad licenses and paperwork and things that you had along with you. What was that like? Did you ever feel intimidated, or like somebody was going to throw you in jail, or any of that sort of thing as you were producing all these documents?
There's two responses to your question. The first, I need to clarify that those references about me having all these licenses and etc. is actually more a reference to myself rather than actually what I needed for the trip. It was actually, once I had my driving license for China I had anyway, but then once I had the car licensed, imported and licensed, it was actually very easy to drive through China, and in fact it's easy for anyone these days. But now to the second question, to the second part of your point, you know, was I ever intimidated? Was I, you know, worried? And to be honest, not a single time. My sponsor, Nokia, had insisted that, in fact, I get a support car, which was a small truck where we could put the car, into which we could put the car, like a, you know, sort of a mobile garage, if you will, because they were very worried that, you know, something might happen. Well, it turns out that throughout the whole journey, we didn't actually put it into that mobile garage once. And the worst security breach that I suffered, quote unquote, was, you see, I had a pen with me to have people that I met sign on the car. In the end, we auctioned it off and gave the money to charity. So the car had signatures all over the place. And every night, we just covered it up in a little nightgown, you know, sort of a nightie for the car. And the worst security breach was then in the morning, a couple of times, you know, we would take the nightie off, and we found that somebody had used a ballpoint pen to sign on the car, just because they wanted to, you know, have their name on the car. So though, thankfully, I was never intimidated. I actually never had any major issues along those lines. A few encounters. The police were incredibly eager. I mean, I was stopped everywhere and all the time, but never in an intimidating or unfriendly way. They just had never seen They had never seen a car like this, and they thought that I had essentially faked the license plate. Because this happens quite a bit in China. That people essentially, you know, they do pay somebody to get a license plate, and they thought for sure this was one of these cases. But no, of course we had gone to the proper, you know, registration in Beijing.
And no trouble with the language barriers, or?
Well, I do speak Mandarin, not as well as English, but well enough to get by.
But out in the provinces, they don't necessarily speak Mandarin.
No, but almost everybody speaks. Well, I should say it's never difficult to find somebody who speaks Mandarin. Of course, like you observed, in the provinces, they have their own dialects, and on occasion, in fact, their own languages, like Tibetan. But many other minorities have their own language. But you'll always find somebody quite easily who will speak Mandarin, and then the communication is straightforward.
You've mentioned about Nokia being your sponsor. What was in it for them?
The idea came, first of all, the idea is to have, you know, why Nokia. It came about as follows. I wanted to do this trip with this car to China. And of course, driving is about mobility. And of course, mobile phones are about mobility. And so I thought, in fact, I have to give credit where credit is due. My wife thought, she's the brains, I just execute. She said, you know, why not put the two together? You know, if this is such an odd car, wouldn't that make some great publicity for Nokia? And I then took this idea of doing this journey and blogging the entire experience using one of their latest handsets. The idea being, you know, look at this wonderful Nokia device, and no matter what adventure you go on, you can actually share your experience with your friends. And that's why, in effect, they ultimately sponsored it.
You got your MBA from Insead in '93?
Yes.
Yeah.
Seems like an eternity.
Was there anything that you learned at Insead, or that you can think back to those times that helped you put this journey together, or your current business of taking car holidays to China?
Well, I used to be, before I went to Insead, and perhaps I still am, you know, my friends would probably say, I used to be a geek. You know, I studied IT, and then worked in IT, in fact software development. And before I came to Insead, I didn't really realize that any business had any other departments other than the IT department. So when I came here, I realized, oh my God, there's marketing, there's operations, there's, you know, finance. So I think for me, you know, Insead opened up many new perspectives. But the other, perhaps the most important for this journey was that when you undertake, well, I suppose almost anything in life, but something that is in which you're not an expert. I wasn't an expert in driving in China and importing cars into China. And, the most important thing is networking and finding people to help you do things. So, for example, during this journey, I ended up staying 60% of the nights. I stayed in local people's homes, and it was, you know, the networking. Partly, in fact, Insead alumni, MIT alumni, it's my other school that I went to, university I went to. They helped me, you know, actually have this incredible experience and make it possible. So I know maybe many professors don't want to hear this, you know, but I have to say, for me, coming into Insead at the time as a rather narrowly focused, you know, geek, I really learned how to network and how to, of course, receive and hopefully also give back.
In addition to the networking, are there any tips that you would give to any budding Insead entrepreneurs?
I think in the end, it's probably maybe also a trite message, but it's, you know, to become happy in life, it's about pursuing your passions. And if you have a dream, you know, don't put it off. Go do it. You don't know what lies ahead. You will never know. But I think life is about the variety is about the variety of experiences. So even if you don't know exactly what lies ahead, just go out and do it.
On the Road in China with Peter Schindler. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.